Hi everyone, welcome to week 8. Next week your paper drafts are going to be due. Well, not next week, but the next weekly session, your paper drafts are going to be due. So I hope you're working furiously on your paper drafts and trying to get finished. This week we're talking about health reform in the United States. Obviously this is an important topic for our nation, and it's an important topic for the upcoming election. And certain portions of health reform have received attention during the debate. Obviously, the stance by Mitt Romney is to repeal Obamacare, but as I've said before, he's been slowly stepping back on complete repeal and just really been pointing to how we need to really create something that's better than the Affordable Care Act. But there are a number of things in the law that Romney agrees with. Just a quick overview here. Obviously, the chapter focuses on the Affordable Care Act, and I'm going to go through some prior attempts to reform health care in the U.S. and uh, a little bit on why it's difficult to achieve, and talk about some of the basic requirements of the Health Reform Act, and add a little commentary in here. As you've read, or as you will read, there have been a number of attempts to reform healthcare. You probably heard about this many times, that throughout history, a number of presidents have attempted to do up over and over again. And here is a list of some of those factors. The most important, from my perspective as someone in the health policy arena, has really been interest groups. If you can't get the appropriate interest groups on your side, then you're just not going to win a debate on reforming the nation's healthcare system. And the reason why is because there are too many players that benefit from the existing system. So if you're going to reform it, you're going to change what we're doing currently, then that means you're going to cut into the profits of some industry in some way. And so you're going to need them to agree with you before you even start the reform process in the legislative process. Because if they don't agree with you, they're just going to fight you tooth and nail the entire way. And even if they agree with you, as we've seen with this recent health reform effort, if there are certain parts of the reform effort that they don't agree with, then they'll speak out against you on that, even though if they agree with the law as a whole. They agree with the entire law if you look at it more broadly, but there are certain pieces that they don't agree with, and they'll definitely fight against that. And we're already seeing that, we have seen that with insurance companies that are pushing back on various regulations of their industry, even though prior to the legislative process beginning, they already agreed that they needed to have some changes take place, and so they generally support the law, but there are clearly certain provisions that they don't like. The Affordable Care Act, why did it work is the question here. And the reason it worked is because of these interest groups. As I said before, the interest groups' concerns and issues being taken into account. So industry was brought to the table, and when I say industry, I'm referring to pharma and the medical device industry. Those are the big players in the healthcare industry. And then also doctors brought to the table. So for the first time in history, the AMA, the American Medical Association, actually supported health reform. In all of the previous efforts, the AMA was staunchly against it. They had all kinds of ads, and they pushed their members to get out speaking against health reform. But this time they were actually for it. And you might ask, well, why? Why were they for it this time? They were for it this time because first of all, times have changed. So managed care is much more common, as we talked about last time, today than it was in the early years of when people were fighting for health reform. So now already physicians are used to dealing with insurance companies that are trying to limit payouts to them in some way. So the notion that healthcare is going to be reformed in some way, and that might potentially lead to a lot of regulations on the cost of healthcare, is not really that foreign to them. And the regulatory approaches that are being used in the Affordable Care Act really aren't seen as being that harmful or that revolutionary. Now, One thing the Affordable Care Act did, which a lot of physicians pushed back against, is that it actually reduced reimbursement to a number of specialists and Medicare providers that receive Medicare. But then there was a subsequent law that amended the Affordable Care Act that actually did what's called the doc fix. It created a doc fix, and what the doc fix is essentially an effort to preserve the reimbursement rates for physicians who are seeing Medicare beneficiaries, with some exceptions, and the exceptions are mainly certain specialties. Certain specialties have definitely been reduced over time, and the Affordable Care Act is just one more example of how specialties are seeing some declining reimbursement from the government. But that's not anything that specialists have not been dealing with for a while, so that really was not new. But what was new is that there was going to be a substantial drop across the board for primary care docs, internists, who really are saying that they cannot see Medicare patients if they're going to have substantial drops in reimbursement. So the Affordable Care Act was amended by the Healthcare Education and Reconciliation Act, and that actually brought the reimbursement rates back up so that doctors generally are not being harmed by the Affordable Care Act with regards to reimbursement. But that fix, as I said before, is just a fix. It's actually only temporary, so Congress has to keep reauthorizing this over time. And you may hear a little bit about that in the news because every time it comes up again, doctors complain that they can't see Medicare patients if they're not going to have appropriate reimbursement, and so Congress runs in and they vote on a new reauthorization of the doc fix, and it's really an ongoing problem that has not been dealt with well, and has not been dealt with in any long-term way because Congresses have basically been shirking it off to the next Congress each time, and it's just a lack of leadership in that particular area. So also there was a commitment to change. Clearly the Democrats had the majority when the Affordable Care Act was passed, so the cards were all stacked in their favor, and this is primarily a Democrat issue, as you know. That's not a surprise to you. We talked about that before. So Democrats were able to really push it through, and it was definitely pushed through. It wasn't as bipartisan as it probably should have been in order for the act to be received well by the majority of the nation. If the Obama administration had proceeded a bit slower and been a little more, I guess, open to sitting down with Republicans more and discussing the Affordable Care Act more, perhaps it would have more of a bipartisan feel to it. Now, it actually has tons of Republican ideas in it, as some of you have heard. Even the individual mandate was initially a conservative idea. But despite the fact that it has a number of Republican ideas in it, the credit for the law, for the most part, goes to Democrats. So in order for a law to have a bipartisan feel, lawmakers want credit for it. So they want to be able to sit down and say, well, I signed on to this and I was part of it and they listened to what I said, and so I really helped make this change happen. But Republicans didn't really feel like that. They felt like their ideas were being brought in, but they weren't really being completely listened to. And some of the changes that they did not want to see happen were also in the Affordable Care Act. It's a very balanced view of what Democrats and Republicans wanted, and because we're in very partisan times these days, Republicans did not want to actually provide votes for it, despite it representing their desires, because they felt like if they didn't get certain things out of the law, then they were going to generally oppose it. All right, in the Obama administration, I think was fairly strategic in trying to actually learn from the past. So they spent a lot of time looking at what went wrong with the Clinton initiative, and they tried to make changes. As I said before, they sat down with the industry and insurers and so on up front to figure out what would actually work for them. And I'd say that's probably one of the main reasons they were able to push it through, because they had the private sector on their side at the outset, with some opposition from certain camps. All right, so let's talk about what's in the Affordable Care Act. First, the individual mandate. You're all familiar with the individual mandate. I will tell you up front that even though we refer to it as a mandate, it's really not. As the Supreme Court has pointed out, this is really just a tax if you make a certain choice. So, um, if you choose not to purchase insurance, then you get taxed. You don't have to have health insurance in our country. You're not going to be forced to take on health insurance. It's just a very strong suggestion by the government that you purchase it. And in fact, after January 2014, if you don't have health insurance during that first year, your penalty is only $95. And I think you all know that $95 is much less than purchasing health insurance. So there are going to be some young, healthy people out there who are going to say, you know, I'm not going to buy health insurance. All I have to do is pay a $95 penalty, and they'll pay it. And the penalty goes up to about $6.95 in the subsequent years. But even that is not a lot of money, depending on the kind of plan that people are looking at. The sort of average plan for an individual is definitely going to cost more than $700. So the penalty might not be strong enough to convince some people that they should purchase health insurance. Also, there are a ton of exceptions to the individual mandate. So if health insurance is more than 8% of your income, then you are deemed as a person who is unable to afford health insurance. So you don't actually have to adhere to the individual mandate. It doesn't apply to American Indians, and that goes back to our long history with American Indian tribes and a very unique relationship with these nations within our nation. It doesn't apply to certain religious groups that have their own method of insuring people. And it doesn't apply to people who face a hardship. And the hardship exception is quite interesting because Congress has no idea what that means. That was placed in there really as a catch-all notion that, well, we'll grab anyone who's really like unemployed or somehow harmed and just unable to really purchase health insurance. And we are really waiting on the Secretary of Health and Human Services to say what the hardship exception actually means. And probably after the election, you'll see more information on some of these exceptions and just bring more clarity from the Department of Health and Human Services on these. All right, so individual mandate, that's there. And the individual mandate was favored by health insurers because it basically puts more people on the health insurance companies' rolls. It allows them to grab a lot of the healthy people out there who avoid purchasing insurance because there's no reason that they have to purchase it. So here is a strong incentive, or sorry, not a strong incentive, but here is an incentive to purchase it, and so hopefully they will. Now, the state health insurance exchanges are another feature of the Affordable Care Act, and the purpose of these is to provide an affordable option to those people who are not able to qualify for Medicaid, but they don't get insurance from their employer. So this is really considered a large mall, and if you look at that Kaiser Family Foundation video that I placed in a weekly session, a reading assignment, then you'll see that they do a good job of illustrating how the state health insurance exchanges looks like a mall, and you essentially go around and figure out what you want. Just think, if you want a shirt and you walk into the mall looking for a shirt, you're going to have a number of different options of places where you can actually go to get that shirt. And so you're going to have to figure out for yourself, what is quality for you. A shirt that I purchase may not be a shirt that one of you purchases. It depends on what your needs and desires are, right? So the same thing with health insurance. You have to figure out, well, what does my body need? What does my family need? And so on. And then you go out and you look around. Now, what's going to be tough here is depending on a number of different health plans that are offered to consumers in states. People may have a hard time really picking. Picking a shirt is a lot easier than picking a health insurance plan, right? These plans tend to be quite complex. The rates may be a little bit confusing to people and whether it's appropriate for them or not. The coverage that's being offered may be a bit confusing. So one thing that's very useful in the Affordable Care Act with regards to health insurance exchanges is that there's an essential health benefits plan. So early on, legislators knew that if they just said, hey, states, create some plans that are affordable to people, that what would happen is that health insurance companies that are creating these plans, and remember, this is the private sector that's offering the plan options. This is not the state paying for health insurance. These are private companies who then will be subsidized by the federal government. So when these health plans offer their various options, if the federal government just said, hey, you offer whatever you want to offer, then health insurance companies would come up with whatever types of plans would benefit them. So just imagine if you're running a health insurance company, you're going to come up with a plan that looks cheap, but it also provides no benefits, right? So the benefits may be really hard to access. You might have a huge deductible to pay before you can actually get the benefits, and it may look very attractive because maybe you'll say, oh, the premium is only $15 a month, but you have a $4,000 deductible, and you're a 25-year-old person. Well, that means you're probably going to never use that health insurance, right? So that's great for an insurance company, and they love to take your $15, $20 a month and sock it into whatever investments they're making to increase their profits. So the legislators knew that that kind of thing could happen where people weren't being offered any real benefits. So there's what's called the essential health benefits. They're being pushed so that each health plan that's created has to meet a minimum standard, right? And this is essentially one of the first times that we've had a federal minimum standard of care for private insurance plans that are typically dictated by state governments. All right. And I have the abortion compromise in there to just indicate that abortion clearly is not part of the essential health benefits. You guys should know that federal funds are not being used for paying for abortion. From the cost sharing and the tax subsidies that we have these poverty levels at the end of 133 to 400% of poverty level, or up to 250% of poverty. What we're talking about is the federal poverty level. So if you look at the federal poverty level for one individual, it's $11,000. Many of you might be shocked to see that number, but remember, as I said before, we're talking about people who are poor. So if you are making 133% of $11,000, all you have to do is multiply 11 by 1.33, and you'll figure out what that number is. Then you are a person who would qualify for the state health insurance exchanges. So 133% all the way up to 400%, which means you just multiply this by 4. So it could go up to as high as $44,000. So that's pretty good, right? For an individual, if you a family of 4, which is the typical number we look at, multiply that by 4, that could go up to $80,000. So probably in a family of 4, combined income of the two adults in the household, they probably each make about 40 per year, and they make a total of 80. You can still actually access these health insurance exchanges. So this is a fairly good deal for a number of Americans to have this option available, and we hope that these state health insurance exchanges will be very beneficial. And it turns out that this is actually one of the features of the Affordable Care Act that Romney likes a lot, because it really gets the private insurance market involved. It lets the states control what's going on. Romney would just take away the option of the federal government creating a plan. Currently, if the states don't create a plan, the federal government will actually come up with the state health insurance exchange for that particular state. So if Mississippi doesn't want to do it, they actually do. But if they don't want to do it, then the federal government would step in and say, well, here's your plan, here's your exchange plan, and all of the residents of Mississippi who qualify can go through this federal website and find the plans that they want. So this is something that is bipartisan, but again, Republicans did not vote for the law because of things they didn't like that were in it. Right? The employer mandate. The employer mandate is something, as you can imagine, is definitely not favored by Republicans. This is seen as something that could potentially hurt employers. It could get cut into their bottom line. The idea behind this is that if you have 50 or more employees, you should be doing something to get them insured. Either you should provide insurance yourself, and all you have to do, remember, is to provide a minimum level of insurance. So The individual mandate only requires a minimum level of coverage. It's called the minimum coverage requirement. It's not called the individual mandate. So if you look at the law, it's called the minimum coverage requirement. So all you need is a low level of health insurance coverage. A lot of people are sort of missing that point when you see it discussed in the media and in various conversations on TV by pundits. People don't point out that you don't actually need much insurance to actually satisfy this mandate. So we're just talking about any basic healthcare plan that you can find out there. It could be the cheapest plan and not the greatest benefits and so on that you can offer in order to meet the individual mandate. As I said before, the state health insurance exchanges are different because they have this essential benefits that they have to meet. So if the employer who has 50 or more full-time employees doesn't actually offer insurance to these employees, then the employer is going to have to pay some money. And you might say, well, why is that? Well, it turns out that if the employer is not paying for health insurance, who's going to pay for it, right? Well, you and me are going to pay, right? So we, the taxpayers, are paying. You might say, well, that's harming that business. Well, but it's also harming us, right? So who do we want to harm? Do we want the business to pay? Do we want the business to figure out a way to provide at least a minimum level of health insurance for their workers, which shouldn't be that much. If you have 50 or more employees, you should be able to find a way to do that. Or do we want taxpayers to pay, which just means me and you? But we're already out here working hard, trying to survive, and so on. So do we need to now pay for the workers of some employer that we're giving money to anyway? If we're giving money to that employer to help their business grow to the point where they have 50 employees, which these days is fairly significant. With 50 employees, you can do a lot. You can have a fairly substantial business, bring in a few $1,000,000. That's not always the case, depending on the kind of business that you're operating. But still, that's a fairly robust small business. Then you should be able to find something out there. And there are a lot of different options for small businesses to join different groups, to sort of link up, merge with other small businesses to negotiate for better rates on insurance and so on. So a creative small business owner can find a way to get this done. But if they don't find a way, or if they think the penalty is actually easier and cheaper for them, then they can just pay a penalty. And so the penalty starts after taking away your first 30 employees. So if you have 80 employees, then you actually wouldn't have to pay a penalty because we discount it by 30, right? So you only have to start paying once you have more than 30 employees beyond this 50 employee requirement, right? So it's actually an 80 employee requirement. After 80 employees, that's when you have to start paying the fine of $2,000 per employee, and it can go up to $3,000 per employee. All right, and the plans you offer have to meet certain standards. So they need to have an actuarial value of 60%, which means they need to cover 60% of your healthcare services, your costs, and so on. And they need to be less than 9.5% of the employee's income. So if the employer is basically just making you pay for the premium, that's not very useful either. I mean, you might as well go out into the state health insurance exchange and get your own plan. So we don't want employers just shoving the costs of health insurance off to their employees, because there are other options that have been created in the Affordable Care Act for that. The idea is that employers should have some skin in the game. Healthy employees help them have a stronger, healthier company and improve the economy and so on. So they have to have some input into this process. All right. Some financial input, I should say. All right, so the Affordable Care Act makes some changes to private insurance. I think the biggest among these are removing the pre-existing condition exclusion. This, again, is a bipartisan policy, and Romney clearly favors this one, and obviously Obama does. Preventative services without cost sharing. I think this is also bipartisan, and I think Romney definitely likes this too. I haven't heard anyone speak out against offering preventive services without cost sharing to Americans. This is something that we think will hopefully slow down the growth in healthcare costs. They've been slowing down a little bit over the last couple of years. So we think if we can prevent diseases, detect them early on, get them treated early, especially things like cancer that cost a lot of money, then we can actually slow down the growth of healthcare costs over time. Prohibitions against lifetime or annual coverage limits. So getting rid of some of the limits on what health insurance companies can offer in order for people who are extremely sick and really need these benefits to actually be able to continue to access them throughout life. And there are a number of other changes. One is the premium rate reviews that are actually resulting in people getting rebates from their insurance companies for the first time when the insurance companies don't spend enough money on healthcare services. So there's an 80-20 rule that health insurance companies have to follow, and it's if you're a smaller health insurer, then there's an 80, I think it's 75-25 rule for you. But the idea is that health insurers need to spend most of their money on healthcare services and not on administrative costs. And if they don't do that, if they don't spend a certain amount of money on healthcare services, then they actually have to pay some of that money back to the people who are paying premiums to them. So that could be either individuals or it could be employers. Some employers have gotten rebate checks back already, and some individuals who have individual health insurance are getting rebate checks back. All right. So I'll try to push through the rest of this. There's a lot here, I know. Just a few more private insurance exchanges mentioned in your book. As I said, there's a guaranteed issue that essentially refers to, is similar to the pre-existing condition clause, just saying that you will be able to purchase some type of insurance. And then there are more wellness plans that are being encouraged and promoted. A number of employers already offer wellness plans, but there are some incentives in the Affordable Care Act to have employers and insurers offer more of those types of plans. All right. Okay. So with regards to Medicare, and the book didn't say a lot about Medicaid, but I just want to mention that Medicaid is being expanded by the Affordable Care Act. As a result of the Supreme Court decision, we know now that states cannot be punished by taking away all of their Medicaid funding if they don't expand Medicaid. But still, states have an incentive to expand Medicaid because they're going to be seeing a decline in what's called DISH payments, which I'll talk about in a second. But when we look at Medicare, as I said before, Medicare reimbursement was actually lowered by the Affordable Care Act. Then it was amended later to bring reimbursement back up for most physicians. Medicare Advantage reimbursement, on the other hand, and this is a managed care version of Medicare. It's called Part C of Medicare. That's actually being changed so that reimbursement is going to be lower for those plans. And basically the idea is that the federal government is spending too much money on these plans, and they want to slowly phase out the Medicare Advantage plans so that we can focus on what's actually working well and costing less money to the federal government. For people who earn a lot of money who get Medicare, they're going to have to pay a little more in premiums than they did before. There's going to be a closing of what's called the donut hole for the prescription drug benefit for Medicare. And so in the past, when people wanted to pay for their prescription drugs with their prescription drug plan they got from Medicare, they would get to a certain number, I think it was $1,300 of coverage, and after that $1,300 they would have no more of their drugs covered until they reached about $3,000, and then the coverage would start again. So that was called the donut hole because there was a gap in coverage. And the question is for our seniors is, where do you find the money to fill in that hole, right? Where if you already don't have the money to pay for prescription drugs and you're using this plan, then how are you going to magically come up with money after you've gotten to the $1,300 mark until you get to $3,000? That really made no sense. It worked from a accounting perspective, a financing perspective for the federal government, but it really made no sense to seniors, and there have been efforts to close that ever since, and the Affordable Care Act does that. And so that's something that's been exciting to a lot of Medicare beneficiaries. All right, let's see. Just quickly, I want to point out, as I said before, there are these DISH payments that are declining, and the idea is that with the expansion of Medicaid by states, that the states don't need these dish payments, and these dish payments are called disproportionate share payments. The notion behind these payments is that if you provide care to a disproportionate amount of really poor individuals, then the federal government will give you some extra Medicaid dollars. But now with Medicaid expanding, states don't need those extra dollars, and so the states really should expand Medicaid, because if they don't, then they not only do they not get the dish payments, but now they're going to have a lot of people who are poor without insurance that are going to be seeking uncompensated care through emergency rooms, and the state is not going to be getting any federal assistance really to provide that care, and not the kind of assistance they were used to, because the dish payments are now going away. So I think the states are going to be incentivized, not from a political perspective, but from a financial perspective, to actually expand Medicaid, even though some of them don't agree with it. Just a couple more things with regards to financing health reform. The health industry is going to be paying some tax fees. There's a 10% tax on indoor tanning. Sorry for those of you who own indoor tanning. This was seen as being a bit dangerous, so that's why they're being taxed a little more. The industry obviously tanning industry obviously doesn't like this tax. There's a 2.3% tax on medical devices. Again, the medical device industry is not so excited about this tax, but the tax is being used to pay for them to have more customers. So if they look at this from a long-term perspective, it really does mean that they'll have more volume, more people over time. So some medical device companies are more upset than others with regards to that tax. And there's going to be a tax on what's called a Cadillac health insurance plan. So companies offering those will have to pay some tax on those plans. And the idea is that those plans end up taking away from the insurance that could be offered to other workers, the basic insurance that could be offered to other workers, and that this is money that companies should be putting into other things, either their own progress, or putting it into health insurance plans that are appropriate for other level workers in their companies. Okay, so that's it. There's a lot there. I know it felt like it was fairly long, but it felt like it was short to me because there's so much to cram in to a short session. But we're available for questions on anything with regards to Affordable Care Act that you have as you do the reading, and as questions pop up in your head. If you hear something in a debate or see something online that we can clarify for you with some nonpartisan information, because although your professors, we might have our own partisan approach and viewpoint, we can definitely find nonpartisan information, because that's our job as academics. So let us know if you have any questions, any thoughts, any problems, any concerns regarding the Affordable Care Act. There's a lot there. There's a lot to understand. Try to pay attention to the major provisions that matter to you and your family, and to your business, of course. And don't try to learn all of it, because your head will just hurt trying to do that. All right. So have a good week. I look forward to your comments in the discussion forum this week. Take care. Bye.